Human eyesight is the organ that has catapulted us to where we are now. Being that we are excellent hunters and having binocular vision, it is the capture of light and interpreting that light that has been the most important aspect of our survival. Even the occipital lobe of the brain is pretty much dedicated to the task of deciphering incoming visual information and making sense of it. Our mirror neurons located in several areas of the brain will also allow us to unconsciously pick up patterns to determine dangers and other intent. But even further out to that point, our brains just kind of work seamlessly to determine what we're actually looking at. All of this on a world where sight by light is the absolute chad of moving around the planet. But what if that was taken from us? What if the mere vision of something could cause us to override our baser instincts of survival? Well then, we are totally boned. And boned we are in the events of Bird Box. As a mysterious apocalypse begins causing people to just straight off themselves, this ultimately would cause humanity to realize we cannot even use the main organ that has shaped our entire race. So in today's episode, let's discuss what these creatures are, what impact they have neurologically on humanity, why looking through cameras at them still causes the same effect, and what may be done to combat this issue. But as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. Without you, I'm totally screwed. I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. If you'd like to support the channel, I do have more merch dropping that should be Christmas themed here over at roanokemerch.com. I also have a gaming channel that allegedly is going strong over there at Roanoke Games. And you can also join my Discord down in the description to watch movies with us each month that end up here. Also, if for some particular reason you guys are exceptionally cracked out and you want to watch Bird Box Barcelona, I will cover the second one if we get to, I don't know, 30,000 likes. Okay, moving on. We kick off our story flying over a scenic river as a person talks about a compound, a community as it's known, and also it's apparently safe. They asked for the younglings and about how the fastest way to get to their compound, which anyone who calls it a compound, I don't know if you want to go there, but anyways, they say the fastest way to get there is by river. Sandra then tells us about how the trip is going to be difficult, that we have to keep our blindfolds on, and also if these younglings take them off, then Sandra is going to hurt them. Dang, coming in hot with that. Well, I would suggest probably keeping those blindfolds on then, as then they pack up to leave on the super happy fun time family trip, as Sandra then grabs the birds and they begin to run out of there using their blindfolds. Following the string that she has left, she begins hearing something all around them as she heads down to the river onto the boat. Putting the younglings in, she begins rowing out of there as something makes noises, but sounds like pretty much from the sky. It is now 5 years earlier. Sandra is painting a group of people. Her sister Jess comes in saying people are thinking that this is serious. Sandra has no idea what she's talking about, as Jess then flips on the news to people mass offing themselves in Russia and in Europe, and now it has spread to Alaska. This is what we would call kind of a problem here. So as the sister offers her to come with them, Sandra's actually having her offspring looked at that day via ultrasound. Evidently, her painting is people's inability to connect with others. What fun. They then talk about her boyfriend Ryan leaving her, as now she's pretty much on her own. That totally blows for her. So heading to the hospital, she gets her ultrasound done, and then they talk about being pregnant and pregnancy in general and jargon related to pregnancy and how horses also get pregnant. Really hard-hitting facts here. Sandra doesn't know if she's going to love her offspring because she hasn't even met them yet. And I mean, that kind of seems pretty standard to me. I know a lot of people are excited, but how can you be attached to something when you haven't even met them? So she doesn't want to know the offspring's gender, as she gets handed a form about adoption because clearly she's not interested. So while Sandra then throws up, doctors start running around the hospital indicating it's about to tip off big time in the US. Leaving the bathroom, she then spots that one woman earlier as she begins slamming her head against the glass. Medical bills, I have a lot of people like that. One time I had ocular migraines and I was like, oh God, I'm going blind. So I went to the doctor. They did no tests. The doctor's like, okay, what are your symptoms? I was like, well, I can't see sometimes. It looks like it's shimmering. He's like, yeah, you have ocular migraines. $700. Dope. So anyways, pretty standard. Running outside, Sandra then squads up with her sister as she says whatever was in Russia is here now and they need to go, which that's actually a pretty Jeep Wagoneer, and I know for a fact that is a 1987 Jeep Wagoneer. Somebody's gonna be like, well, that's a Jeep Cherokee. No, the wood paneling is a dead giveaway. Don't at me. So everyone at this point starts freaking out, driving like lunatics, as Sandra's sister says, say that 3 times fast, that she can't go to her place and she'll just stay with them, as everyone then starts offing themselves in a massive scale. Seeing someone else run a red light, because that person definitely knows what's up, Jess then just wants to follow the law during the apocalypse. Like, bruh, run the red light. So she does finally run it, as Sandra then reaches for her phone, as Jess then sees something in the distance asking what is that. She begins crying as her eye vessels then start bursting. Very interesting initial damage. Let's talk about that. So what we will see prevalently throughout is massive damage to the ocular organs. Of course, the cornea still appears intact, but the iris and sclera are heavily damaged upon seeing whatever is causing people to freak out. Because of this, I would have to assume the more delicate tissue of the sclera is injured, which is actually causing leaking blood vessels to begin becoming the norm. It does not appear to really affect the epithelial layer of the skin, which there actually may be a reason for that. It seems that if you close your eyes, whatever the energy is, it cannot pierce the skin. The layer of the skin that is pretty much all dead is the epidermis. Dead tissue appears to block whatever the problem is, but the eyes in particular are pretty much all living cells, which seem heavily impacted. So whatever this energy that is being emitted cannot go very deep into the body and just kind of stops at the first layer. What is quite clear, however, is that once entering the eyes, it heavily impacts them. The question is, why? So Jess then tries to crash the car. As Sandra was wearing her seatbelt, she ends up living, but seatbelts, of course, they save lives. Sandra and then Jess crawl out as Jess steps in front of a truck and gets totally shreked. Well, that wouldn't be a traumatic event at all. Everyone then starts running away from whatever is causing this, but the problem is nobody knows where it's coming from or in which direction to run. One woman then runs out to Sandra named Lydia to help her, as then she sees her mom telling her not to go, and then she just kind of goes and just walks towards a burning car, gets in, and then it explodes. Again, we never see what causes this, but we can start to figure out the pattern and what actually is affected by the visual stimuli. Now, we know light, it's just photons, and photons behave like a particle but also a wave. So as photons come off of this creature, I believe what's actually happening is the creature is emitting these photons. It's not just light hitting it and then you seeing it. This energy will actually enter the eye, striking the retinas of a person. Upon doing so, the optic nerve is stimulated to transmit the signal, but it's highly likely that if damage on the outside of the eye is taking place, then this means damage internally would be quite high as well. Traveling via the optic nerve, it will then head to the occipital lobe as is standard, but something more begins happening. Other areas of the brain appear stimulated more, which would be considered normal from what we would expect. But as a result of this, memories and possible hallucinations are induced. And again, we have to ask, how does this happen? Well, to understand that, we need to know where the optic nerve travels past. On the underside of the brain, around the midbrain, past some very important endocrine glands such as the hypothalamus, amygdala, pons, medulla. Those are not endocrine glands, but they are associated with the endocrine system. Pineal gland, which is also associated with the endocrine system, but many other autonomic areas of the brain. Essentially, the optic nerve has almost a direct line to these areas. In fact, blue light, for instance, is known to affect the pineal gland and affect your ability to sleep because this higher energy wavelength causes certain signals to be tripped in the optic nerve, which in turn will tell the pineal gland that it is daylight and you need to stay awake, which is why you need to wear blue light blocker glasses about 3 hours before bed. But this highlights a rather interesting aspect of this process. It's clear something is leaking out, so to speak, from the optic nerve to the actual rest of the brain. But we'll talk about what these hallucinations are here momentarily, because I actually see something rather interesting that does link this idea, and I think it confirms my hypothesis, which, if this is what it actually is, somebody did do their research, which is pretty cool. You always love to see that, especially in a Netflix movie. But as they try to enter the door, the police show up. Party over, bro. The old man is locked and loaded Brides of Christ, as then they watch the news as to what's happening. Sandra then calls to her mom, who predictably is not answering, as Machine Gun Kelly then pops some pillies. He really is copying Eminem. So the old man says it's probably bio-warfare, as another woman says she heard something but doesn't know what it was. Everyone hears something, but those who didn't look up are lucky enough to tell the tale. They surmise that whatever it is, it makes you off yourself, as then they start closing up all the windows. Some parents get a call as their offspring then tells them they see something and then horrifically off themselves. One man then says this is endgame. Humanity is being judged currently. Red Vest knows what's up. Humanity has stories from every culture about these things. It's the end time. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and everyone is wearing bacon pants. Sandra then tells one man that her sister saw something and got a look on her face and then took herself out. She looks sad. Another woman then started talking to her mom, as the old man says that his wife, or at least that was his wife Lydia, but her mom had been gone for over 10 years. Outside, a ton of people have gotten got as something then passes the window. So these things do have a very real physical form. It's not just like some ghost or something crazy like that. They are real animals that block the sun and create shadows, as we will see later. They can also cause wind to pick up when they descend. This would also mean they're flying because they're able to descend. So to be honest with you, time to fire some flat cannons into the sky randomly. But on the river, it has been 6 hours. As Sandra then throws a blanket over their heads and checks the bird box. Ha! He said it! She then calls out on the radio, but nobody answers. She gets only static as the birds start chirping as something comes overhead, but she can't see what it is. It has now been 3 days that they've been stuck in the family fun house. Over on the radio though, they say not to go outside, and as long as you don't look, you won't get got. Honestly, I'm not saying that I would do this, but like pound for pound, the best option is to literally disable your own eyes in any way that you can. Not saying it's the perfect option, but if your eyes are eliminated, these things can do absolutely nothing to you, which is odd given that they have physical forms, but this indicates that they are afraid of the Giga Chad Homo sapien and they have to rely on their virgin scary form to take you out. They literally cannot physically impact humanity. It's so bizarre. But the squad then talks about how long the food is going to hold out at this rate, with the old man saying not very long. Tom then heads towards the door, hearing someone knock on it as one woman says they need to help her. Sandra grabs the handheld to pull on the old man as he was going for it and just gonna leave her out there because this guy kind of obviously sucks. But as everyone covers their eyes, the woman covers the door and then they let her in. The old man says Sandra doesn't know how that thing works anyways, and then she shows him by unloading a shell. See, everyone should practice with a handheld. It's a tool, not a dangerous snake. So this pregnant woman's name is Olympia. That's quite the name. Also, someone needs to slap this old guy because he just kind of sucks. The owner of the house then says, well, I have cameras all around the outside, so we should be able to look at this thing without it directly looking at it because the images are not direct. They're just pixels. In theory, that should work. So they need to take a look out there, but obviously there is a risk doing this. So they tie down the owner of the home so that he doesn't take himself out. They do it very poorly. Maybe they should have given him a better chair, as in they hand him the remote so he can take a look around. Checking the area, he doesn't really see too much, but apparently the old man is suing him because of what this guy was building on his own property. Again, just somebody kneecap this dude, that's all I'm saying. So Recruit is just randomly stretching in the kitchen as she tells Machine Gun Kelly he doesn't have a chance of hitting that, as the old man goes and gets a drink just tasting it. Pergananet then takes some prenatal vitamins as Greg keeps focusing in on what he's trying to find, which is anything, but he really doesn't see much of anything. As the wind blows though, the shadows change. However, even with just the pixels, his eyes become afflicted as Greg then takes himself out by falling out of the chair. Again, you guys should have given him a better chair. So digital kind of like scrambling is out as well. Man in bird costume screaming in the park atop a picnic table then grabs Recruit as they leave the room and get ready for bed. So this is one of those issues that needs to be reconciled. Digital does not protect you, so how does this work exactly? If we look at the functioning of the nervous system and then we look at the functioning of the wires, the two are really not so dissimilar from one another. Yes, one passes along electrons to convey a signal while the other organically sucks up potassium ions to create a slightly more positive charge, but they both use electricity in some form or another in order to convey information. So what does that mean for digital not working? Well, I believe it goes back to something known as biophotons. Biophotons are essentially photons that the body will release. That's right, you do emit light, which has always been very interesting as basically ancient man was talking about emitting light way back in the day. Very strange. Anyways, the light that we do emit though is just exceedingly imperceptible to your naked eye amount of light, but you do emit light. These photons, interestingly enough, emit from your body almost everywhere except for your eyes. They do sort of emit some biophotons, but it's just at a much lower level. Whatever this creature is, I believe is also emitting biophotons. It's not so much of light that's just bouncing off of it that you can see it that is the problem. It's the biophotons, the creatures that are emitting, are the problem. Something about their wavelength might be so precise that it causes cellular damage, as it's almost like a resonant frequency of sorts. Except with light wavelengths, that even just looking at these things digitally may cause the same wavelength to be absorbed by our eyes. But the crux of this issue is you have to absorb enough of it for it to cause damage. It appears as though those that have a blindfold on may not see it, and it does not seem as though there's enough of these biophotons to really cause issue. At the end, actually, the ceiling is covered just enough that biophotons can probably emit through it, but it cannot get through. I also believe it does work as sort of like a resonant frequency with humanity in particular, as it does not appear to affect other animals. So what is a resonant frequency? Typically this is associated with sound, but for the most part, it's when one object's vibrating frequency syncs up with another. Say if you hit like two tuning forks together with the same frequency, the sound waves will vibrate the next tuning fork next to it, which then causes it to emit the same waves as well. I believe it works like this, just with light. But what does it actually do to the brain? Well, let's discuss that in a moment because it's not good. So Preggers comes over to Sandra saying she thought it might be a good idea for them to be close considering they are both pregnant. They then talk about how Sandra is alone as Preggers then asks about her family. Like, gal, everybody's family is gone. Just assume that and then talking about it, it's like getting divorced, right? And then somebody's like, hey, how's your wife doing? It's like, bro. Anyhow, also the window blinds are open in that room, just so you guys know, as Sandra then walks off. Approaching the back of the house, she finds Recruit and MGK messing around in one room. I'm never gonna unsee that. Nobody will unsee that, as Sandra then goes back to bed. Meanwhile, back on the river, they've been floating for 14 hours. They hear a man yell to them about eating food and needing help. Yeah, why is that guy able to see? Sandra then tells them to keep their blindfolds on as she keeps rowing. Whatever that thing is taunting them to take off their blindfolds as in someone is in the water. The man tells them to take their blindfolds off as the creatures are beautiful. No thanks. So she beats him down with a machete and then he goes under bleeding out. What a Chad. Or Chadette. Or is that Stacy? I'm not 100% sure. So here's the first example that we see. It's not just you offing yourself, but possibly these things are actively working towards the goal, which is a little alarming. Realizing some humans would cover their eyes for long enough, it appears that others may be forced into a sort of haze where they attack other human beings under the guise that they're actually helping them to see. Maybe it really does feel great to these people and they just want to help, but the reality is this thing has already been stacking bodies like mountain highs, so it's just a manipulation tactic through and through. But why would some of these people be able to deal with this and others not? Well, there is going to be something that tells us that about pretty much all this in a minute, but I believe it's based on brain structure and if damage has already been incurred. So back up at the Big Brother house, Tom says they need to go get more food. The market down the road is locked up and John says he's not going. So they're just going to black out all the windows and then drive the car slowly down the road using the GPS. Well, that seems like a fairly crappy plan. Let's see how it works out. Guaranteed to run into something, to be honest with you. I just feel like maybe even just walking could be just as helpful. Anyways, so the garage gets stuck open and running over people. Just think it's a speed bump and just move on. Using the proximity sensors, they hear creatures around them as something is in front of them and behind them as they see only shadows. Then it's all around them. So he floors it on blind faith as then they arrive at their destination. Opening the doors, they feel around to get into the market. They open it up and then head inside. And I mean, why not stay there? I'm sure we'll find out later. Spoiler, I found out, and let me tell you, easily solvable problem. So as they check everything to make sure it's clear and all set, they begin their shopping for everyone as again, why not just stay there? You have a ton of food, you have alcohol, you have an easily enclosed area. It just seems to me to be the best way to do it. But the old man then grabs some booze as Sandra and everyone else kind of just go and grab perishables. Tom goes to make some moves on Sandra as he talks about his sister being back in Sacramento, and they talk about Sandra's childhood as she tells him she's older than him and she could have been his babysitter. I mean, that's the fantasy, right? Okay, I gotta really separate reality from corn. So she finds the birds and then asks how they got so lucky. The old man makes an announcement that he's hammered and then he says, why don't we just stay here? The old man says the rest of the group should just starve at Greg's as it's not their issue. They're literally 1 block away from you guys. Like you could probably cover your eyes and shout outside of the door, telling them to follow your voice. They then start hearing someone banging on the door. Opening the door, the birds start freaking out as the dude then forces his way in as Vestman then runs out there blocking him as the dude says, it's beautiful, as he presumably then stabs Red Vest Man. I mean, take that guy out and the supermarket's yours. He's obviously lost it, and I mean, again, once he's gone, that's it. Just pull the trigger on him. So getting back to the house, old man needs to catch these hands, bit of a caricature at this point. He talks about how his wife is the kindest person that he ever met. Sandra then calls him Jackwagon, except worse, it's just my words. The old man then says he's never wrong. He then hands Sandra some whiskey. She's pregnant, so she sips it as Recruit and MGK head out and grab the car, leaving everyone there. Thanks for the heads up, guys. And where are you even headed? I mean, what is your game plan here? Where are you going? Why are you leaving? You won't be able to see it all. You're gonna get just down the road and then crash. Anyway, so with their stupid plan in action, who cares? Honestly, this does sound like a plan Machine Gun Kelly would come up with in real life. Meanwhile, back over to the river, it's been a full 24 hours. The offspring then start asking about how much longer it'll take, as she tells them it'll just be a few hours. Like with most parents, this is an absolute lie. Hitting a semi, one of the offspring then gets ejected as she grabs him. They lost the food and the blankets as they hear some wind chimes in the distance. Bringing the boat up to shore, she then heads into the woods with a blindfold using a guide wire. Approaching the house, it'd be hilarious if it was just one giant loop, like the water she's in, and it was just really a large lake, but I don't think that's how rivers work. Heading inside, she takes off her blindfold and looks around. Whoever was in there also tried to cover up the windows, and she takes her guide wire and then starts raiding the place as one offspring stands up in the boat. Sandra then hears metal clanging as something is pulling the wire. The wind begins rustling, and then she heads back outside, following the wire as she begins calling their name. The offspring says something is wrong with Sandra, as then she puts on a rope to go find her. Being chased by something whispering. Well, that's horrifying. As the offspring then follows the guide wire, one of the creatures approaches her, but Sandra drags her back. Sandra is angry at her, telling her if something happens to her to save herself. And now we jump back over to the real world house. And before getting there, I do want to point out the birds freaking out. I believe this is going to have to actually affect your body on not just like a biological level, I guess is the best way to put it, but literally like a physics level. I believe it also will change the photons that you emit because it ends up bothering the birds, as we will see later on. But that's just what I think. I don't know if that's 100% confirmed in lore or not, but by seeing these things, it's gonna have to actually change your physical makeup, which obviously there's biological ramifications for that happening. So everyone then talks about how being scared makes you selfish. As Tom talks to Sandra about family matters and whatnot, Sandra then grabs his hand so that, he can touch her stomach, as it's now 28 hours on the river. Calling out on the radio once more, nobody continues to answer. And back at the house, she's also calling out on the radio. The pregnant woman then lets in another guy as Tom checks this person. His name is Gary, and he has to stay there, saying they're after him. He reports that they broke in. They were psychos who were from the mental institution. They force open people's eyes to look at these creatures. At this point, while most people who view this thing and don't off themselves are psychotic, you may be wondering how. But it appears that, or like how would you even designate them, right? It appears they have some sort of clothing that kind of highlighted that they were from the mental institution, but it does also highlight that brain damage I mentioned earlier may play an effect on what is happening. More than what can be considered a random sample amount appear to have survived from the institution itself. How is this done? Well, it appears to me that those who have prior issues, potentially, those who already had like a neurodegenerative disorder, such as with schizophrenia, would be the people who appear non-affected in a largely negative way, such as offing themselves, because I think we could all kind of agree that's probably a negative way, but they become fanatical after viewing these things. Because of this leads me to believe these are biological ramifications based on physical effects. When the biophotons emit, they strike the human retina, following the optic nerve. Halfway back, however, the signal will begin affecting the amygdala in particular. In those with healthy brains, the amygdala is responsible for the feeling of self-preservation and things like fear and rage. However, in those with mental disorders such as schizophrenia, this area of the brain has difficulty communicating with other areas of the brain and may even have the issues such as being reduced in size or almost non-functioning. And this is the linchpin to the entire thing. The brain has its self-preservation mode shut down in those who are healthy, and those who are not, it's just business as usual. And this is why there is drastically different responses for those who see it who are healthy and those who are not healthy. But what about those who see it and were not even in the mental institution? Well, if you look at the amount of people who actually have schizophrenia, it may come as a shock to you, but this is like a much larger class of people than you might realize that have the ability to become schizophrenic but never do. It's a combination of nature and nurture that could trigger it. You could take someone from like a horrific household who could develop it, but never does until they smoke some of the devil's lettuce, which is actually known to trigger schizophrenia. That's right, smoking that stuff. While most of you are probably okay, it can actually trigger the onset of schizophrenia that may not have happened had you not done it. But don't get me wrong, I drink beer. Occasionally I'll have a shot with my buddies. So it's not like I don't have any vices either, but just be aware of what you're doing and possibilities that could exist. Likewise, you could also take someone from a great household who just kind of cracks into the pressure of school. I have personally seen this. Then again, you could take someone from neither of those scenarios and they still develop it, while somebody could be in both those scenarios and they never do. So I would propose that the ones who are running around who have seen the creature, yet they're really not having that much of an issue, are those who may have this disorder already lurking in their minds, it just never presented. So then when seeing this, if you do possess this underlying trait, it will bring it out 10 out of 10 times. Those who do not have this underlying trait immediately lose their sense of self-preservation, but just losing this is not going to be enough for you to just take yourself out. So what else do we need to happen? Well, it appears in those with normal brains, a seizure-like episode begins. Sometimes they cry, sometimes their memories are tripped, but the outcome is the same. With the amygdala damaged by this frequency, several other areas as well, with the hippocampus being affected, which is also known to store memories. That means the memories come flooding back, causing you to see this creature differently than how it probably presents, even at all, because of the damage that's being caused to your brain while you're looking. It's like looking at the sun, right? You're gonna still damage your retina. It might not hurt, but you're gonna damage your retina. But this still doesn't 100% indicate why you wanna take yourself out. Well, there is another area of the brain very likely also being damaged, given its close proximity to the aforementioned structures. It is the anterior cingulate cortex. This is the area of the brain that is noted as being sort of the problem child in those with offing thoughts and negative self-talk. This area of the brain is what is to be basically the most responsible in those who have attempted to try something based on MRI scans. I believe it to be a combination of events. In some areas of the brain, self-preservation is lost. Then memories are triggered to make people probably unafraid, as well as there's like a disruption of conscious thought with a petit mal seizure, which then causes people to freeze up. After this, the anterior cingulate cortex appears to be hyperactivated, which then causes misfirings, resulting in the negative self-talk and then the self-deleting tendencies. This culmination of issues causes a person to immediately go to take themselves out. If you can kind of like chain them down, then maybe it'll pass, but I believe the frequency may have already induced permanent damage. Much like the brown noise, which is a frequency that can induce you into crapping your pants, this causes the cells to vibrate at a certain level, and I believe somehow this wavelength causes your neurons to either misfire or die, but it could also be based on the fact that it is changing potentially even atomic structures within your cell. So if they're only misfiring and I'm wrong about the atomic structures, then this means normalcy may be established if you take your eyes off of the creature for long enough. But if neurons begin dying or literally your atomic structures are changed, which can have cascading consequences, then this process is very likely permanent. And to wrap up the biophotons being the source, have you ever seen what birds can see? Probably not. My dear editor, pull up an image of human sight versus bird sight. I believe the birds start freaking out because they can actually see a source of light that they know could be dangerous and humans just cannot comprehend it. Sort of like birds can see in the UV spectrum, humans cannot, right? We can't see UV light, but it's like birds, they see it all. Everything is so much more pretty for birds than it is for us. But at least we're not cats. They see everything kind of yellowish, which must suck. Anyways, we can't comprehend higher wavelengths because that's just the way the cones in our eyes are. So birds try to get away from it, causing them to spaz, whereas humans look directly at it, remarking how beautiful it is. And that's also, somehow this may change the biophotons that you have and what you're emitting as well, which that's gonna obviously change atomic structure, which is why the birds will freak out even if a human is affected. So Gare Bear here then managed to apparently not look at anything. The birds are chirping regularly, which is interesting as sometimes they'll freak out, but sometimes they won't. It may be like an issue that progresses then. So the people who broke in wanted to see what was happening and everyone needed to see. The old man wants to kick him out as then he takes the force multiplier back. The older woman then smashes a jar in his head as they put him in the garage. Brigannet is sad as she couldn't help herself. She just had to open the door. The woman says if something happens to her, she needs to take care of her offspring. Sandra then got her a Hello Kitty on a supply run as one of the offspring has it now. It has been 38 hours on the river, and that's gotta be a complete killer on your back. Getting under the blanket once more, she tells them about the rapids. She asks which offspring will need to look in order to direct her. Back at Jersey Shore, Sandra calls out as everyone is listening to music. Sandra is starting to have some pain as Brigannet woman then straight up goes into labor. So the birds are chilling out as Sandra also looks like she's having issues because her water just broke. Man, at the same time, that is not ideal. Gare Bear then sits downstairs listening to music while everyone gives birth, and he pulls out drawings of what the creatures look like, or at least what his brain could comprehend. Well, they definitely look demonic, which means he has definitely seen these things already. So the birds are not really a surefire way to tell who's infected, so to speak, so yeah. Anyway, so the old man then bangs on the door as Gare Bear puts his birds in the fridge, and then he starts clearing the windows. Old man tries to tell Tom that Gary has gone crazy as then he finds his drawings. Gary then knocks out Tom as Gary opens the garage door, basically screwing the old man over. Brigannet then gives birth first as Gary comes to check on them. He stands over them as he begins opening the windows as Brigannet sees it first. She says it's not so bad as Brigannet then hands her baby over just before jumping out the window to her doom as Gary holds open the old lady's eyes and forces her to look at whatever these creatures are also. The old lady then stabs herself, taking herself out as Sandra hides with the offspring. So the old man then shows up with a handheld as he fires a shell into Gary. Tackling him, Gary then stabs the old man several times as Tom finally starts waking up. Fighting over the handheld, Tom then finds Sandra having taken out Gary as congrats on being a new parent. It has now been 5 years as they practice listening to rocks, or at least the clicks of rocks, while Tom calls out on the radio. Sandra keeps raiding places as some cars show up to the house. They immediately take off as they say nothing is there without even searching. Okay, so I'm guessing there's just a roving band of lunatics who have now seen the creature and want everybody else to see as well. Telling Tom that people are driving around looking for him, Tom and Sandra have blossomed into full partners at this point as over the radio they get a call. A guy named Rick then tells them about how they have a compound at the river's end. Again, somebody says they have a compound? I'm not sure, man. They then tell them the fastest way to get there is by the river, and with the younglings, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to get there. But they'll know they're nearby by the sounds of birds. Getting ready to go, Sandra and Tom have a right proper domestic over if they should actually go or not, as Tom tells them a story about how when he climbed up a treehouse he used to have to the top of the tree, he could see a whole bunch of things as Sandra completely ruins the vibe and then yells at Tom about how they have to survive. There are no dreams to be had. No happiness allowed. Heading to bed later that night, Tom then tells Sandra he saw birds atop the tree that he climbed and the offspring need to see that too. So the next morning they all head out and then break into another house for some supplies. Letting the rest of them in, they then eat some Pop-Tarts that totally wouldn't be stale as they apologize to one another, which nice reconciliation in front of the offspring, teaching them good things. Eating their Pop-Tarts and then hear vehicles approach as people start to break in. Tom says give him 15 minutes and if he's not there, to go without him. Tom then comes out asking if they need any help as Tom then opens up with them, which he ends up like injuring several of them, like good for him. Tom then takes off his blindfold to see them as he takes out the rest, going for the last one, but then he sees the creature, so he's like, oh god, and he takes out the last guy with the last little bit of control he has before taking himself out, which is a total bummer, but dude, way to go out like a Giga Chad. So Sandra has a nice cry over this, as one does, as then we jump back to the beginning of the movie. They are now headed into the rapids, 42 hours in. Putting the blankets over her head, she then tells them once again about, how dangerous the waters are, but someone has to look. The girl volunteers, taking away the choice from Sandra, which is a tough call. Someone else's offspring, or your own. She then says nobody is looking, she's going to do it live. I mean, here's the thing, you're close to the rapids, right? Get out of the boat and walk along the side of the river. Why are you, there's a way you can do this. You don't have to take the rapids. Anyways, so the ride gets a little bumpy as then she's heading towards the rocks but can't see anything. Capsizing the boat predictably, she calls out to the offspring, that's not ideal, as she begins screaming their name, which is boy and girl. That's their names. Don't get me wrong, I get not getting attached in this era of life, but give them a name. Anyways, finding them, first she finds boy as then she hears ringing from the girl. She's on the other side of the riverside with her eyes closed. Checking the bird box, they then follow the bird noises. Heading deep into the forest, they begin hearing voices from all the people of their lives as the creatures have pretty much surrounded them as Sandra then trips and knocks herself out. The offspring call out for her, but she does not answer. She calls out once more to them, try to get them to answer, but nobody really does. So the boy then goes to take his blindfold off as the voices start telling him it's safe to take your blindfold off. It's not safe. Sandra has a breakdown as then she hears the bell asking where girl is. The little girl then goes to take off her blindfold and does as Sandra starts apologizing. The girl then approaches hearing this breakdown as then they all have a nice hug over it. Okay, so don't trip again. You barely got them back. So Sandra then starts hearing Tom yelling, no shot, you need to get out of there. He says he needs help as the creatures begin approaching, but evidently it cannot touch them. Again, these things, they kind of suck. I mean, you have to look at this. The only way they can do anything. The birds then start doing bird sounds as they run to the refuge, but the thing is hot on their tail. Approaching the house, they bang on the door as the monster, Tom, keeps yelling. They then let them in. Rick approaches, telling them to come with him. He tells them they can take their blindfolds off as they have entered the school for the blind. The reason for the blind not being able to probably be greatly affected to this is due to their eyes never actually relaying the signal for one reason or another. It may be damaging their eyes, but their eyes are probably still already damaged. With the cloudy lenses, just not enough of the biophotons are getting through. The retina doesn't work properly, so that signal's never conveyed. Or maybe their eyes are even just missing. Either way, biophotons are not able to enter, be interpreted into a signal, so no damage to the rest of the brain is ever incurred. But heading into the courtyard, I'm down with this idea, but can't these things still get into this area? I mean, the birds do warn them when the creatures are nearby, but I guess it's a terrarium type of deal or whatever it's called. They then release the birds that she had brought to join the rest of the birds as the doctor from the beginning approaches them, as finally Sandra gives them names, probably from embarrassment because the doctor approached what is their names? And she's like, oh, the girl's Olympia and the boy's name is Tom. The kids are like, okay. So then she hugs them, finally accepting them as they go and play with the other offspring. She then hugs the doctor in question as now, who is going to do the supply run? Sandra then looks up and thus concludes Bird Box. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leave a like as always. It's appreciated as it gets the video out there, and subscribing lets you know occasionally when I post. Remember, if we get to 20,000 likes, I'll do Bird Box Barcelona. I don't know why you guys would want to see that, but some people just want to see it. Anyways, let me know what you think about my biophoton idea down there, as down in the comments section, and how it affects the brain. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Games, and Roanoke Tales channel links. We're also hosting on Roanoke Tales again, as well as my Patreon. But speaking of patrons, I'll thank mine real quick. First, massive thank you to our lone astronaut, Tristan Kessick. Thank you, my man. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And I'd also like to thank our scientists, Eris, Dakota 23, Invictus Echo, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, Official Texan, and Virix Hellstrom. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate all y'all's support. It goes a long way towards keeping everything running smoothly, so thank you. But all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.